Yeah, it's one of those of like you use the old signature because it was pre-pandemic, a little bit slimmer, but then you add the beard and it just looks like it's two separate people. Welcome everybody in. It's another Nice Job live chat here on the Nice Job podcast. And you know what I'm going to say? I'm going to check in, see how you're doing out there, making sure you're doing well, and let you know that you're having a bad one, you're having a rough one, you're in the right spot because we're going to turn it right around right here. But also, that I'm excited about each and every guest. But this in particular, it's a topic that I've been discussing in various forums, various groups. And it's kind of, I don't want to say a hot topic, but it's something that comes up in a lot of conversations when you talk about marketing, talk about from digital marketing perspective, and especially I would say with home service professionals, contractors, the whole like. There's kind of some camps, back and forth, people that believe one way or the other, and there's also a lot of conjecture and a lot of opinion. So in this exact situation, this is what podcast episodes are for. I went out. Who's an expert? Who knows the ins and outs? Who's also willing to not just say, well, this is what I think, to be like, no, this is what I know. This is what I practice. This is what I preach. But additionally, this is someone coming from an understanding standpoint of what you're going through. And I think I found that individual, and I think you're going to love hearing from him and his company there. I invite you to check it out. But as you know, this podcast is not about selling companies. It's about great conversations. And we're about to have a good one. So let me, now that I've set the bar extremely high, welcome our guest. It is Mark Levesque from WebRunner, the co-founder over there. Mark, thank you so much for joining me here on the Nice Job podcast.
Hey, Sean, happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It really is a pleasure for us. And I want to dive into, I always kind of ask people at the top just to get a good perspective. They haven't heard from you, a little bit of their backstory. But with you in particular, I'm definitely interested because I know part of your reason for co-founding WebRunner was the desire to kind of help home improvement contractors, help them to get more customers, and in a way that wasn't just flash in the bang, flash ban, things like that. But before we get to that stage, I want to go back a little bit further. How did you end up on this path where you were coming in contact with contractor professionals, or you started to feel that itch and you started to know, you know what, I can start dedicating some of my life resources to this because this feels like the right spot for me?
Yeah, happy to answer that. I think that's how much time do we have?
As much as we need. As long as you're engaging, we can run it for as long as we need to.
Yeah, I think that's I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of it, the 30,000 foot view. WebRunner is a company that I co-founded back in 2010, 2012. I was in my late 20s, and I had done a stint in the software world. So I was working for a company that helped digital agencies manage large-scale media campaigns for a huge volume of advertisers, businesses. And so I kind of got a lens into what the agency world looked like. And so I said, you know what, we got to go and kind of do this ourselves. I left, started WebRunner, young, naive. You jump into business 2 feet first. You think you got a plan until you get punched in the face, and then you realize, oh, that plan is maybe not so sound. So WebRunner years back is very different than what WebRunner is today. We were industry agnostic in the beginning. We worked with everybody and anybody. We tried to do everything in the digital marketing world. And so fast forward a couple of years, we eventually, figured out what our sweet spot was. And, today we focus exclusively on lead generation for home improvement companies. I will say that those initial 5, 6, 7 years in the trenches helped us really get to where we are today. We can speak to any aspect of digital, but really we've chosen to zero in on paid media because it's where we feel we can help our mutual clients the most. There's typically a big struggle when it comes to understanding how to leverage these paid media platforms to drive leads predictably and in a profitable manner at that. So that's the one thing that we do. And don't ask me how I came up with the name because that's a longer story.
Oh, well, there you go. So we'll keep it just the short stories from here on out, but mostly keep it to kind of, we talked about your expertise. I love that you talked about, you dabbled in a couple different things. WebRunner was doing a lot of different things, gathered that knowledge base, and then found out where you should specialize, where you should go in, so that, when people are working with you, it's not like, oh, we're catch-all. What do you need us to be? It's like, hey, these are things that we've have foundation in, that we kind of have knowledge on, and can help guide, craft, and kind of bring you through. Lead generation is one of those words when you kind of throw out, as people think, from the greasiest of like buying this list to perhaps something they feel like is the hardest thing that they do. If someone comes to you and is like, I just don't get it. I thought I understood how this works. It doesn't. How do you talk them off the ledge and get them to understand kind of either your process about it, or what maybe they should start focusing on if they're trying to generate more leads?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Sean, that the nature of why kind of digital marketing has that negative connotation, like you said, you hear lead generation right away, you're thinking of kind of the greasy salesman, right? Is because there's relatively low barriers to entry. So, and I'm not, putting down any of the smaller companies out there, or the people that are, attempting to build a business. I mean, I think there's no better time to start a business than in, today's economy. But that said, the barriers are extremely low, and with technology, software solutions out there, it's relatively easy to start a digital marketing company. And so you get a lot of people that kind of jump into it, and you start offshoring all sorts of components, and you just focus on the sales and marketing side. And you may not necessarily have that track record to be able to properly advise and consult the business. You're doing maybe nothing more than marketing a service, taking a transaction, passing it off to someone else. So unfortunately, there are a lot of people peddling advice where they just don't have the credentials to do so. And so that's where people have to be careful. If you're engaging in a conversation with somebody and you feel like they're just trying to put a menu in front of you and sell you an item off a menu, it just doesn't work. So I mean, the approach that we take is, it's very consultative. If somebody is looking to bring us on or to work with us, it's because they're looking for a different outcome. They're not where they want to be. They need a solution. So sometimes they've identified the problem, sometimes they haven't. They need help to do so. So that's what we do. We come to the table and we drill down and say, okay, well, you want help with digital marketing, which aspect of it and why? What's your goal? What are your objectives? So we really start with the end in mind, work backwards, and then figure out, one, if we would be the right partner to help them get to where they need to be, and if our solution's the right fit. So that's our philosophy. It's our approach, super transparent. And I think it works well for us.
And I think a key definition, or almost a translation, so to speak, is leads are great, but ultimately you want leads to be able to become sales, become customers, become clients. Because just knowing people are interested, but then not actually booking any sort of thing with you, it might stroke the ego a bit, but I doubt it's helping your bottom line. I doubt it's helping your bank account. I doubt it's helping your growth. So when we talk about going from leads to sales, we talk about a conversion, right? And we, at NiceJob, we talk about the conversion rate of your website is one of the more underrated metrics when it comes to how to grow. People look at so many other things. We think that's kind of important. Why is that such a crucial element? I know I kind of talked about it at a high level, but I wonder if you could dive in a bit deeper of what having a strong conversion rate is actually meaning for you, besides just a metric that you're not quite understanding.
Yeah, that's a great point, Sean. I mean, I think it means everything. It could mean the difference between profitability and hemorrhaging cash, right? It can mean the difference between, a company like us, we charge to deliver a certain result to a customer, and that some people will see it as a fee. But again, if you have conversion rates that are to a point where you're able to generate an extra couple leads or acquire customers at a certain price, we can almost offset the cost that it requires to have an agency like us manage your ads. So I mean, conversion rates on every level. There's so many different conversion rates. You've got, at what rate are your ads converting, right? Click-throughs on your ads, that's a form of conversion rate. When people get over to a landing page, at what rate that turns a visitor into a lead, that's a form of a conversion rate. So these are all components that need to be optimized. But I think far too often people look at the wrong metrics, right? And we'll call them vanity metrics, people who are overly concerned with traffic, right? So visitors, people to my website. I want millions of people to my website. And, you brought that up earlier, but prior to this call, it's you got to have a pulse on which metrics matter, right? That's number one, I would say.
Yeah, when he talks about what we were talking about prior to the call, making sure that there's no secret sauce that we were discussing prior. I was asking, I wanted to explore with him, is that oftentimes people are so concerned about traffic, and it's hard to say don't be concerned about traffic because it is important if it's the correct traffic, if it's consistent traffic, if it's traffic that is in an ideal scenario that how that what their actions are, when they're visiting your page, and ultimately hopefully converting. And it's really hard to, when someone is caught up on how much traffic am I going to get, or how much traffic should I see, to sort of walk back and say, okay, well, if you have 100 dedicated perfect visitors versus 1,000 unqualified visitors, and to kind of walk them through that of like, this is why it's important. So is there a balance of where you kind of want to get your traffic from versus, because you talk about ad conversion versus website conversion, all that stuff, it's all important. But how do you almost express that argument of, well, is conversion rate more important or is traffic more important, when the answer is both, but they're also so linked that it has to be specific? Does that make sense? Like, they're related, but they're not competitors. But if you focus on the wrong thing, then they do, and that could lead not to success. So how do you approach that crowd? It's like, it's traffic, 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 traffic rules everything around me.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, there's different schools of thought on that. I mean, you ask, you pull people, you get, 10 million different responses, right? But it's a relationship that I agree with you in that both sides are equally important. You're referring to traffic, but the same can be said about leads. There are people that are overly obsessed with leads, leads, leads. I need more leads, more leads. And leads is not always the solution to your problems, right? You can get all the leads in the world, but if you can't close the leads, if the leads aren't the right quality, you're not any closer to your goals. So again, I think the notion of starting with the end in mind. So if you take your revenue goal and you're able to kind of break that down once you know what your average customer is typically worth. So if you've got a kind of a one-time ticket price because your service is a one-time service, right? If you're roofing, siding, windows and door replacement company, you'll have higher tickets, but you'll service that customer, you won't see them again. If you're in something that's maybe a little bit more home service, maybe you've got a nice recurring revenue model there where you sign a customer, it's not so much initially, but over the lifespan, it can be substantial revenue. So you got to look at what is a customer worth. And you look at your revenue and you say, okay, great. Well, to generate this much in revenue, I'm going to need to acquire this many new customers. Now you can start looking into your sales process. And then you see that, hey, if we need 5 leads of a certain quality in order to generate a customer, because we close at 20% historically across the board, now you've got a really good handle on how many leads you need to go and generate. And so the question that you're posing, where should I go and get my leads from or my traffic from, becomes a lot easier when you can clearly articulate what kind of lead volume you actually need, right? Because sometimes you might be willing to, if you run campaigns on Google search, people who are on search engines looking for a particular service, you'll likely find a higher intent in those leads that come your way. Whereby in contrast, if you look at a lead that comes from a Facebook platform, somebody's scrolling a feed or Instagram, they happen to see a video or some pictures that you've posted that they like, you could get a lead from that as well, which will likely cost you a little bit less, but maybe the intent is not as high just because they weren't deliberately out there on a search engine looking for a solution to a problem. I don't know if that helps, Sean, but that's,
Yeah, it explores a bit of that balance I talk about of, well, what would be more concerning if I saw my traffic not increasing, or if my conversion rate either isn't increasing or starting to dip. And I feel like conversion rate can let you know how qualified your traffic may be, correct? If you're seeing a good conversion rate, at the very least, you have a strong sales process and you're getting people that maybe you shouldn't, but it's strong enough you're doing it. Or it means that your audience is viable. It's a qualified lead that's ready to be converted. And so I think in that instance, that conversion rate is probably a good metric to tell you how your traffic is doing. What's the next step from there, though? So I think my traffic's doing good, but I still want more. That you talked about, like I'm always going to want more. How does that filter down with perhaps the ads you're running or things like that? Like, how can you start building this sort of analytical process of, okay, if you're seeing something here, this is what it means. If you're seeing something there, that's what it means. Because I think that's why a lot of people will probably end up coming to you, is they're not almost sure of the question, but they want to have this understanding of when I'm going to be warned if things are bad and when I'm going to be excited when things are trending well. So what are some of those key indicators you can look at to understand that, hey, the process you have is starting to be pretty good and let's start expanding on it?
Right. Yeah. And I think the way that you're looking at it in terms of, first get the quality of your traffic dialed in before you start opening any kind of floodgates, right? Before you open the tap and try to drive droves of traffic, make sure you're attracting the right audience to your website or your landing pages or whatnot. So having a pulse on the rate at which your content converts at, I think is super important. And then beyond that, when you need to dial that in further, if you're running paid acquisition plays, meaning you're putting money into platforms like Google and Facebook and Instagram and Bing and so forth, that's a faucet that's pretty easy to kind of turn up, right? You start spending more money, great. How many clicks, how many visitors, how much traffic, you're literally buying it. In the marketing world, it's simple. Everything boils down to two things. You need traffic, you either earn it, right? You're blogging, your social media, you're building backlinks, you're building profiles on directories. I mean, you're active online, right? And a lot of people will argue, well, that stuff's free and I can do it myself. Well, there is a cost to it. There's time to do all that. On the flip side, you've got paid, where you can pay and almost overnight you can get that traffic. And the traffic will be relative to what you're putting into the programs in terms of ad dollars. Which one is better? I don't think it's a question of which. I think people need both. Some are shorter term, longer term, so you got to look at that. But I mean, I would say that once you get a traffic source working, and that, hey, I'm either investing this much time or money into this channel, it's netting me traffic, which is converting at a certain rate, I'm getting leads, I'm converting those leads at a certain rate. Now you've got all the answers to the metrics you need to compare with another traffic source, another channel, right? So the way any home improvement company should be looking at marketing dollars invested is, where am I getting the greatest return on my ad spend? So if I can, from search as a channel, see a 4, 5, 6, 7 to 1 return, great. Well, maybe my print, maybe that's not performing as well. So naturally, I'd allocate more dollars to the search stuff and then print, right? So it's literally a hierarchy. So you spend as much money as you can on what's yielding you that highest return, and then fall back onto the second once you can't spend any more money there, and so on and so forth, right up to the point where we've got customers with 50, 60 different lead sources. And that's really how they look at the whole picture. Maximize spend, we're tapped out. Okay, next best lead source, next best lead source. And that's how you unlock scale when you want to really, really grow.
Yeah, because you're able to diversify that point, so you don't become over reliant on one particular funnel or lead source. But then additionally, it allows you to start strengthening those other ones. Mm-hmm. Based on what you just said, I still go back to the common discussion point, the argument I hear is when you talk about, all right, well, your conversion rate's an important metric to watch, is some people still think that can be overloaded with traffic. And so from the website in particular, I would love to kind of let's start chipping away at this myth a bit, that your website needs to be this overly produced, huge monetary foundation with all these bells and whistles versus something that's getting a job done in this rate, conversion rate. Right. Am I wrong in thinking that that's an important pillar of, hey, if you start off with a website that's going to convert, then you can start feeding more traffic. Then you can look at other ways to convert. Then you can start having, better targeted ads. You can start diversifying the lead source. Am I wrong? Not wrong in that assumption, but am I naive to think that that is good high level advice? Or is this one of those situations like some in business where like, look, it's going to be specificity. It's going to be to each their own every single case.
No, I think that is absolutely the way to think about it. It's a technical way. You can tell that your experience. You know what you're talking about when it comes to digital. If you look at let's take e-commerce as an example, completely outside of our industry, right? But that's an industry where you can really associate a value to a visitor, right? Because your website will generate revenue, and you could tie that total revenue right back to total number of visitors. So now you can say, every time I generate X number of visitors, well, I makes, this much money in terms of sales and profit and so forth. So you can put a value to what it costs you to acquire a customer, but at the same time, you can put a value to what a visitor is worth. So if you say, hey, a visitor for me is worth $10, then the question is easy, you know, how many visitors can I get for less than $10? If I can spend $5 to get visitors, great. I'm making money, right? But in the service world, our transactions are not happening online; they're happening offline. So it's a bit more ambiguous in terms of what the value is in terms of traffic to a website. So people resort to, I want more traffic. And it is wrong, because you're right. It's not about more, it's about quality. And if I was to say, Sean, would you rather have 3,000 visitors to your website in a month or 300? You can't really answer that question until you know, okay, well, at what rate do my 3,000 visitors convert at in comparison to my 300, right? So you got 300 qualified visitors, right? That are all part of your ideal, audience. And you got a website that converts at a great rate, call it a couple percent, that could potentially be worth a lot more than 3,000 visitors that come from way outside your territory that convert at, 0.00 whatever, So that's really the way that you got to look at it if you're purely looking at it from a traffic standpoint, because traffic is important.
And yeah, and sometimes on websites in particular, when we look at conversion rates, kind of the bare definition is taking an action. So that could be booking an estimate, something like that, but that puts them in now the part of your sales funnel that becomes way more in your control. When they're just scrolling a website, there's a lot that you can try to do to navigate them and convert them, things like that. But ultimately, even if they click book right away, it's still for you to, do a great quality job, have a follow-up, get your review, get your recommendation, get your referral, and then continue that. So it becomes a reoccurring revenue and not just one-off. It's not a hot dog stand. You're a service business here.
Yeah,
but it reminds me of a story of living in an apartment complex and getting a flyer in the mail for a landscaper. And I chuckled at first, but I kind of just felt bad if someone spent money. I don't have a lawn. I barely have barely my own front door, and I'm getting this. Like if someone's posting it in a high rise, they're not really worried about the lawn, so to speak. Right. You can get the turf on the balcony here, but it just talks about that. But I guarantee that individual, that company, went with some blanket approach. Mm-hmm. We'll get you 10,000 flyers. We'll get you this, and that, and there was no mindset behind it. And I think that's where ultimately I tend to land. And it sounds like, you obviously with your expertise, you kind of feel like, look, like if you're bringing in people just for the sake of bringing in people, you can't really expect too much result. And at the very least, the only place you can go from there is if your mindset is, I don't have enough people. If you're not getting what you want, the only mindset to go is even more people from there. And then now you have a flawed system. And now you've kind of gone down. And I know, Web Runner and yourself in particular and things like that, you talk about, that paid ad channel, that sort of focus. I know sometimes whenever you talk about anything sort of paid, and we touched on a little bit, that people always look at their budget. And sometimes they see that and pulls of sweat start going down because they're just running so thin. They're running so tight. Is there an organic step you can kind of take to get prepared for that sort of thing? So if you think it's really out of your budget, is there a step you should take? Or is it like, hey, this is going to be the cost of doing business? I'd recommend trying to find, maybe don't take the company out for smoothies every Friday and buy some ads instead. Like, where is that balance of, hey, you know what, maybe start here, then when you get a little bit more in your bank, go after it? Or should it be the other mindset of, look, understand this is going to be the expense, so do it smart so you can start seeing the ROI quicker?
That's right. I think definitely make sure that you can put enough fuel into the fire to get things going if you're going to start leveraging paid. It is a big mistake. People try to dip their toes into the water. They don't put enough dollars into paid. They don't really give it a fair try, and then they pull the plug early because they didn't see the traction that they needed to see in a period of time. And especially now, more so than ever, the way these platforms work, they're heavily based off of algorithms. And if you don't send enough positive signals to an algorithm, it's difficult to get campaigns optimized, right? And so number one, I would say, do the research. And it's a lot easier to get projections, to get forecasts that are pretty accurate, so you can get a feel for what it would cost you to generate a lead in your market. That's number one. When you know that, then you can determine, is this feasible financially? Does it make sense? Can I spend money on leads through search or through social to acquire a customer at less than what I'm going to make by bringing that customer on? And if the answer to that's yes, then great. I think people get worried with budgets, and one of the things you got to be careful if you're talking with a marketing company is if they're asking questions like, well, what's your budget? How much do you want to spend? That's a bit of a red flag, right? As a business owner, if marketing company is able to get you profitable return, technically your budget's unlimited, right? So we don't really care what a budget is, because if we can show a return and it outperforms your other marketing sources, you'll continue to spend money. Some companies, the way that they manage things, their compensation structure will be tied to what you're spending. So again, there's sometimes bias baked into that. So you've got to be aware of that. But for the most part, Sean, I'd say, yeah, it's pretty easy to predict and forecast and get a sense for what a lead's going to cost and how much you're going to need to put into a marketing program to generate volume of leads you would need. So, having a good handle on your metrics, right? Either the average value of your customer, what your margins are, your close rates and all that are necessary, because otherwise you can't determine whether or not you can or can't do this,
I never really heard it put that way, but I love that perspective where we talked about, if it's being done, correctly and efficiently, you're eventually at the point where your budget isn't kind of a concern because the return's coming back. It's not money thrown out. It's not a landscaping ad in an apartment mailbox. Mm-hmm. And I love that that's almost a little bit of a flag when it comes to kind of creating a relationship if you're looking outsourced. But then the research element of it, we say all the time, episode after episode, is it might be a little hard at first to kind of understand and get, but the information is out there. There's groups out there. There's podcasts out there. I know you guys have a great series as well, that can kind of help you get a handle on this. We could go so much deeper into a lot of these things, really get nuanced. We could go across a lot of your expertise, but I like to keep these episodes nice and focused. But I have a feeling that we're going to be inviting you back on the Nice Job podcast at some point. But before you go for this episode, I want to ask you the question I've been asking all of our guests here in season 2. We talk our guests about being experts, but I know there's always something that you're working on. So my question for you is, what is something you don't know now that you're either actively working on getting the answer to, or you're excited about finding the answer to?
Ooh, that's a good question. What are we working on now that we may not know the answer to, that we're trying to find the answer to?
Yeah, and I mean, you can even go off business if you'd like as well. I'm just always like to get into the mind of these people that are experts in their own right, things like that, just to kind of, I don't know, like level it out of, yeah, it's not that we know everything, it's that we get excited about working on these things. So what is one of those things?
Yeah, and let's go outside of marketing for a little bit here. I mean, give people perspective. Like I said earlier, we're a 9-year-old company, and the first couple of years we've paid the price of admission, right? We've gone in a whole bunch of different directions, and that was wonderful for us. And the past 3 or so years since we've been dedicated entirely to home improvement, things have really taken off, both for us and our customers. And so we're at the point now within our organization where we have to take a little bit of a step back away from the business to focus more on ourselves internally. So things like your operations, your people, processes, basically all your standard operating procedures. How are you going to unlock a certain level of scale? So I would say these are things that we're diving into, and I'm particularly fired up about that. Find it, interesting. You look at your company today and you've got those 3, 5, 10-year kind of growth plans. And what you didn't think was possible, 5, 10 years ago, you've surpassed that. Now you're looking at that next stage. That's really exciting. We're implementing Traction, the book, EOS. I'm sure many people listening have probably read that or looking to implement that. So that's great. But yeah, just people and process. I think there's things there that we can always learn, so how you hire, how you put the people in the right seats, how you incentivize and motivate people. And, those are things that I feel like we're always students. We're constantly trying to learn and evolve in that regard, because you cannot become, complacent and just accept status quo and keep it like that, because things are changing too fast nowadays.
Well, you talked about paying admission. It sounds like right now you're enjoying the ride a bit and still finding ways to be excited and explore new avenues. So best of luck in that endeavor. But thanks once again for joining us here on the Nice Job podcast. I really enjoyed the insight, really enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, I know Nice Job and Web Runner are doing some things together and things like that. So we'll be looking forward with more with you in the future. If anyone's listening to this and would love to get in touch with you about either your services or just to learn a bit more about you and kind of what you're doing there, where should we direct them towards?
Yeah, thank you, Sean. Appreciate that. You're a great host, by the way. I wish I had your sort of expertise on camera on the podcast, but you're awesome. Where people who are interested in learning a little bit more about us, head over to webrunnermedia.com. We've got a blog on there. We try to publish great content, case studies, things like that. And if anybody wants to connect directly, I'm easy to find on LinkedIn.
Well, I appreciate the kind words and I appreciate the time as well. I hope you have a great rest of the day, but thanks once again for joining us here on the Nice Job podcast.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Sean. Take care.
And for all of you that tuned in to watch or listen to this episode, I don't think we have a written version yet. We haven't gotten there just yet. But taking in the conversation today, I especially want to thank you as well. As you know, all I ask from you is if you want to like, you want to share, you want to comment, you want to send it out to somebody, we would absolutely love that. It really helps our podcast grow. If you want to review our podcast, we'd love that. You know how important reviews are. But most importantly, you gave us a good listen. Take something from the episode today, try it out in your business. If it works, awesome, great. If it doesn't, that's another data set for you to make a better decision on. So that's all we asked from today. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mark Levesque from WebRunner. We'll be back next week, season 2, rolling right along here on the Nice Job podcast. Until then, we hope you're being healthy. We hope you're being safe. And don't forget to have a little fun out there as well. Take care, everybody.